If you would like a Drift Week 7 hoodie, shirt, or stickers, head over to the LoneStarDrift.com website. Let's get started.
Hi YouTube, we're gonna do a quick story with Chris. I wanna jump into the past a few months ago. I was in here and you told me a wonderful little story and I wanted to film it and I forgot. And it was about how the JZ ended up being so smooth and like the Toyota product so smooth. And we think of JZ as like super strong, super durable, all these different things. And I didn't really think about the smoothness part because like I have a JZX90 and we drive it around because it's a huge turbo car. I cruise around sometimes like at 5,000 RPM so I can hit it and like, you know, take off and I'm in boost and stuff. And I was driving that car around and we were load tuning or load tuning cells or whatever on a standalone with like the auto features and stuff. Yeah. So I'd have to sit at like 6,000 RPM for 10 seconds at a certain load and had to do every cell that way. And it's crazy how smooth that engine is. Like at 5,000 RPM, 6,000 RPM, a JZ cruising on the highway is literally smoother than an LS1 at like 2,200 RPM. It is the smoothest goddamn engine. So I was just gonna have you tell me the small story and the audience a small story about how the engine came about being so dang smooth, why it's so smooth, and why that's one of the like contributing factors to why it's so dang durable as well. 100%. Not just like we think of the rods as being the strong point or the crank or the block itself, but it's not just that, it's also go.
Well, I mean, literally it doesn't really matter how strong the crank, the rods, and things like that are, right? Softer materials would be like bearing surfaces and things like that, right? So the story goes, and I mean, this is obviously like on the internet if you look for it, right? But you got that camera like right in my face. Are you getting a good shot of this? I look good? I look pretty? Tell me I'm
pretty. Is this gonna be the story just how they started the LS400 and how they could put a wine glass on it?
Yeah. The Lexus LS400 is designed to stir the soul and not much else.
So basically, like, I was like looking into it, and I wanted to know what Yamaha's involvement was, right? So you see Yamaha on the valve covers and things like that, and you automatically, I personally at least, and I think a lot of people, like, we automatically go to that place where like Yamaha does develop some engines, right? Whether it's like, motorcycles and things like that, and like there is some like motorsports divisions association with Yamaha, right? But the more I dug into it, the more I learned about the 2JZ, the JZ platform, the UZ platform, things in that time. And basically during that time, when in the like 80s, early 90s, they were coming out with Lexus and they wanted to develop luxury cars. And a big thing with luxury cars at that time was the amount of sound inside the car, whether it was road noise, just the overall decibel rating of the sound that resonated inside the cabin, right, from a luxury standpoint. And that was a very important thing. And you saw automotive manufacturers such as BMW, Mercedes, adding layers of sound deadening and things like that to cut down on road noise, engine noise, just drivetrain noise in general, whether it was differential or transmission, all of these things, right? And so what I found was a lot of the involvement of Yamaha was their acoustical department, right? Where they did a lot of research like looking at decibel ratings of noise that resonated from engines, transmissions, things like that. And they worked together with Toyota to bring the noise down rather than adding layers of sound deadening and insulation and things like that. But what if we made an engine make less noise when it operated, run smoother, things of that nature, right? And one of the important things that they did at that time that was groundbreaking was balancing, right? And that's how they brought a lot of the engine noise down, right? The same thing with like valve train noise, right? Where they took a solid lifter, right? And so basically the factory 2JZ valve train is a shim over, like a bucket over, right? Where it goes over the valve on top of it. And a lot of us do like the shimless bucket conversion, right? The factory lifter in a JZ is actually a solid lifter with a small puck on top of it that oil is able to get underneath and float up and then take away that lash, right? To eliminate sound. And that's another reason why it's so reliable. Also, obviously, like when you get into higher lift cams, you have more room where the valve has to be able to keep up with the amount of lift, and it can toss shims with aftermarket cams. Within the factory parameters, it's wildly reliable, but it's a solid lifter with kind of a hydraulic element to it to take noise out, right? So when you look at some of the things they did, it was very innovative at that time. And we've talked about balancing over here with some of our balancing equipment, and like NASCAR, right? Where like the standard in NASCAR for endurance type stuff would be to balance to 200 ounce inches or 0.2 grams, right? Well, you know, Toyota's doing that in their engines that came right out the factory, whereas like a GMLS is balanced to 500 ounce inches from the factory. That's their tolerance, right? Or, you know, 0.5 grams, right? So we look at that, the importance of balancing in terms of noise, and that's what they found, right? But also inherently, they made engines, like you look at engines, remember, I don't know if you remember seeing this. I saw this one time, there was a truck, right? And this guy, I don't know if it was like a T100 or some kind of Toyota pickup truck, and he broke 1 million miles in this truck, right? And it was insane. And Toyota found this, it went viral, they bought the guy a new truck, and they took that, and they got that truck from that guy, and they recovered that. Well, they actually have like a museum where they broke that truck down, they broke the engine down, just to show the internal components, and the skirt coating was still intact on the pistons, right? And so these are things that they carried over in their engines, but that's where it all started from. So like I said, when I spin a 2JZ crank on my machine, if it's good, 200 ounce inches or better, every time, like clockwork. I don't even have to touch them, right? Like, it's insane half the time, right? Like, what they balance these things to, right? And like, what that correlates to, like I said, when you think about like, when someone's building a really high-end race engine, we chase it down that far. Like endurance type racing, things like that, right? Like, even in drifting with LSs, we don't even chase it down that far, like 300 ounce inches or something like that, and we're good. Like, we don't sit there and chase that number, right? That balance, like, because it's not a necessity, right? But for them to do that and see the importance of that from the factory, but it really goes to show when you talk about longevity, durability of things, right? Like, what you don't see, right, on the inside is the wear pattern of things. How much, you know, like the piston rocks, like at the top of a cycle and wears into the block and things like that, right? Like when you put 100,000, 200,000 miles on it, things aren't the same. But when you look at the condition of the inside of these components and we take these things apart, even the nastiest looking ones, and we pull the pistons out, we look at the wear patterns on the block, the cylinder walls and stuff like that, it speaks volumes for how important that balancing is. And a lot of people don't really get to see that. But that's what made that engine so great at that time, right? Unfortunately, like, some of that ideology is carried on through automotive manufacturers and stuff like that throughout the years. But obviously, like, the platforms have become more complex and things like that. And so, like, maybe they're still using some of that train of thought, like in modern engines and stuff like that, and the importance of balancing in modern engines, but they're not platforms that are really easy to adapt. There's not a ton of aftermarket support or taking on kind of like the popularity of like the JZ platform, right? So like, we're not seeing it, right? And we're seeing like modern vehicles with direct injection and all this stuff, right? So like the simplicity of like the 2JZ, we're just not making things as simple as they were back then. And for transplanting into your race car, simplicity is big, right? But that's kind of one of the important reasons of what like that made like that JZ platform so reliable, lasts so much longer than even counterparts and competitors such as, you know, Nissan and stuff like that at that time, right? And there's obviously, I don't really want to start talking about Nissan shit because obviously like there's a fucking million things wrong with some of this stuff, and I'm not sorry guys, but I'm not like a JZ or RB fan or whatever. They just need to take all those RBs and stick them on a boat and just send them to Australia because they love those things there, and they could have those. I do work on some, but it's not my favorite thing. But yeah, the JZ is, there's a lot of things, like I said, that really we could tear into like so many little incremental things about Toyota and what they did and the quality of parts and things like that that they used when they built the JZ platform. But when we talk about smoothness and how it runs and just longevity, bearings, things of that nature, pistons, just like the condition that when they come apart, you know, like the balancing is really the core of where the quality comes in a JZ. And the main reason why I feel personally the JZ is a superior platform to a lot of stuff. We talk about buying stock, like used Japanese motors, right? And realistically, when we talk about stock used Japanese motors, right? I mean, the evidence is out there, right? Like, I think it's kind of common knowledge, right? Like, obviously you have guys that have preferences, right? Like, I'm a Nissan guy or I'm an LS guy or whatever, right? But like, at this stage, it's kind of hard to argue like the reliability, the longevity of a JZ and like what it's capable of doing in its stock form. It's pretty impressive. And like I said, most of that could be attributed to balancing.
Jumping back just a couple minutes, when you were talking about Yamaha and their involvement, such as with the 1UZ and the LS400 platform, I never specifically thought of like the JZ as a Lexus platform, and it kind of was. Like the 2JZ came out in the Aristo originally, and the 1JZ, I don't remember the first thing it came out in, the Mark III Super or the Soar or what happened.
Yeah,
but
Mark III Super Soar.
They definitely had to develop those motors immediately and forefront for the Lexus platform. And people think of like these amazing stories, the build-out stories, if you've ever heard about how they developed the 1UZ and the LS400. But now I can kind of like extrapolate that the JZ was also on that path, because we kind of always thought it about as a racing engine and everything else, but it had to go into the Lexus products, so they had to do all that refinement. Did Yamaha have anything else to do with like the actual sound of the motor, or like, you know, how they, because I don't know if you watched the, what is that, the LFA with the V10? They talked about the insanity of just making the airbox cover and like, you know, resonate properly and do all these other things. Because when you think about the JZ, it sounds so good. And it's not just the balancing of just the actual physical parts, but like the balancing of every pulse coming out of the head to make that thing sound so beautiful through the exhaust.
And there's so much you can do, and the engineers, obviously at Toyota, are incredible. I haven't done too much research to figure out like, from a sound perspective, you know, like with the intake manifold designs and things like that, like I haven't done that much research or nerded out on it that much, right? It was mostly just a curiosity thing of like where, like why the Yamaha logo was there, right? Like, and that was it, right? And it kind of started and ended with like the balancing and like some of the things I'm fascinated about, like some of the things they do for like longevity and stuff like that. And it really kind of ended there, right? Because obviously from a performance standpoint, like digging further into it there was really nothing left for me to like kind of unveil, right? At that point, or at least I felt that way, right? But you know, like I said, it's like I said, it's interesting to me to see like an automotive manufacturer's approach to something, right? Where like even when we start like looking at like modern vehicles, right? And you look at a BMW and how much paneling is underneath it, and like the sound deadening and how crazy they are about like cabin sound and noise, right? And even like going back to 90s BMWs up until today, right? Where like Toyota still takes that and puts that energy into creating quieter transmissions and quieter engines and quieter drivetrains rather than trying to muffle the sound as much as possible, right? And that it's just interesting to me, right, to see that difference. But like, you know, obviously like I'm sure there's a lot to it, right? And like someone at Toyota at that time or more involved at the time would really know that, right? But like obviously I can only research what's available to me on Google and things like that. And
I should go find somebody to tell that story.
I have a limit to like, you know, how much I really want to dig and pry, right? Like I'm not going to start looking for like old Toyota employees and like not, you know, like maybe if I start a YouTube channel or something like that, I'll go dig one up, you know?
Until I learned about the LFA, I didn't realize, because again, I thought they went to Yamaha for like some motorcycle head technology or something, because they made like 5 valve heads or 6 valve heads. They did a lot of weird stuff. And then you start realizing they went there because they had the largest sound chamber, because they make pianos and all kinds of crazy 100%. Stuff. And that's what they went there for.
It just didn't click for me. It was like it was such a cool thing to me, right? Like I wasn't like digging hard for it, right? But I was curious, right? Like a lot of people are curious. And I'm like, I was going to say the same thing, right? Like some like head technology in there that made the valve train so good. But reality of it is, it wasn't like super groundbreaking stuff. But then you go back and you look at it and you look it up, and like I said, it was like one of those things that was like a surprising fact that I had found. I was like, because like you know, I see the Yamaha logo and in my head I'm thinking like cylinder head stuff, right? And then I totally forget about like the grand pianos and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my God! And then you put two together, and then it just makes a ton of sense, right? And you're just like, oh wow, it's like a really like eye-opening thing, right? And it was like a really cool thing to kind of uncover, and that they discovered the importance of balancing, right? And I've learned a lot about balancing, just like with engines, right? But even like other things like turbochargers you see now, right? Like, and the levels of balancing, right? Like, and you see the difference, right? It's like, why can some of these turbocharger manufacturers that are world renowned for making a quality product, they source some of these castings and things like that from China, right? And forgings or whatever it is, right? And they come out here and they finish them, right? So why can't China do as good of a job, right? But it's technology, right? Like, they maybe have much more affordable labor, right? But like from a technological standpoint, they're a little bit behind, right? And I was actually talking to the owner of CWT, which is the guy that produced this balancer, and we spent a lot of time together. And he was telling me about how he was going to China, and they were paying him to go out there to set up his American machines over there for balancing turbine wheels, for turbochargers and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, like this is going to get really interesting, right? Like if this becomes more readily available. That was like the number one killer of these things, is like the balancing, right? Like, and how precisely they had to balance. They had balancing technology, but not to the degree they needed to make like things like turbochargers and stuff reliable. So it was like really cool, like information. I was like so interested, I almost bought one. I was like, I don't want to build turbochargers, but fuck, dude, this is like
You
cool
wanted
shit.
to
Right? He's like breaking the whole thing down.
Yeah,
He's like, dude, this is like really cool. But yeah, like, and that's the big difference, is like the precision and balancing, and that's what makes some of these turbochargers like more reliable and last extended periods of time and things like that for like factory production cars and stuff like that. And then bringing that technology into the aftermarket world, it was just a little bit slower to adopt in the aftermarket world. And then even behind that would be China, right? But they are starting to get some of those capabilities, and they're starting to spend the money and purchase like realizing that like American-made balancing equipment is better, right? Their technology is better. We're more advanced at it, so they're starting to adopt some of that stuff. And obviously, I don't want to promote Chinese turbochargers, right? But like, and obviously, you just still don't know to this day, right? But you're starting to see more of them perform.
I was gonna say probably all turbochargers are now Chinese.
Yeah, exactly.
Or from Mexico.
Yeah,
I think Garrett's all from Mexico.
But the finished work probably gets done here, right? Like the balancing and assembly and like quality control and things like that. And that's what you're lacking in those, right? Yeah, just to circle back, I mean, like I said, the balancing is the number one most important thing on an engine. Like I said, but the thing is, there's just so many critical moving pieces that like, if the bore isn't right, the cross hatching isn't right, like so many things that can fail, right? Like, but definitely at the top of the list is balancing, right? And I think that everybody should feel that way that builds engines, right? Like our machines engines, that balancing is the most important thing. It's what holds everything together, right? It determines, you could do the perfect work. It determines how long your perfect work stays perfect, right? You get a little bit more chatter. You got to think about like how many revolutions, right? You're talking about 7,000 RPM, 8,000 revolutions per minute, right? So like tenths count all of a sudden. You start thinking about the speed something rotates, how many revolutions you're asking this to do, right? Like it's a lot, right? Like it adds up really fast, right? So if you have a little bit more chatter, a little bit more of this or whatever, right? Like you got to multiply that by how many RPMs and how long, like it starts to be a big deal, man.
Well, thank you so very much for telling us that story. We're heading off to Utah now, so thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
See you later.
Drive
Bye.
safe.
Thanks for taking the time. Let's go, Cy.
And Drift Week 7 is brought to you by Just Racing. They have a very fancy machine shop and build very fancy racing engines. Thank you to BC Racing Custom Coilovers for always supporting everything Lone Star Drift and Drift Week does. What Monsters Do, who also has a new logo over on the right. Thank you so much. Go over to their website, buy some merch. Discount code EBISU. Thank you to Vapetasia for supporting drifting for quite some time, including forest weighing and all kinds of other cool stuff. NK Wheels, Volino Tires, and Heatwave Visual. Thank you very much. Thank you, audience. Bye.